I'm making a video game with underwater mechanics. In this devlog,
Enemy updates, trailer making tools, visual effects, death animations, post-processing effects. Hooch had the fantastic idea to make the mines better by making them explode other mines near them. I first set up logic for a mine to call mines around it and invoke the explode function, so all mines would explode if they were in their explosion range. The effect for the explosion was bigger than the explosion radius and would show over mines that wouldn't explode based on the range, so I decreased it a bit. The mines can also be detonated with a chest, and if the player's in the explosion radius, they still take damage. Hooch suggested adding a delay so the effect is a chain reaction instead, which looks fantastic in my opinion. Prior to making the trailer, I watched a few Derek Liu videos. One of them was a recommendation to build debug tools to make game capture easier. I started by making a system that toggles a panel and a hotkey only available during debug build and changing the game to allow infinite health and oxygen. One of the key options Derek Liu mentioned having was the ability to toggle the HOT off for trailer capturing, so I worked on that part. Another suggestion from the video was to allow your debug tools to set any state, so I made that another option for my debug tools, especially useful when capturing specific oxygen amounts. My tools also allowed me to spawn and remove chests in order to stage scenes involving the anchor. With those options, I proceeded to capture some preliminary footage of each level, going slowly through it and then speedrunning to make the trailer. I made a preliminary clip, asked for feedback, and Hooch came back with some great ideas to make both the trailer and the game better. Adding screen shake when you get hit was already on my list of things to do as part of the polish pass, so I decided to tackle it now. A while ago, I bought the Feel asset in a Unity sale, so I started by exploring what it could do for me. The asset supports screen shake out of the box, and there was a tutorial to follow to set it up. Unfortunately, based on my settings, the camera slowly tilts after multiple shakes. Looking through the forums, there seemed to be a post that pointed to a few solutions. A user posted a script that worked for them, so I tried that out just to see if it was a magical fix. It was not, but their solution helped me understand the problem. Looking in 2.5D view, the root problem is the camera does not return the rotation correctly. Reading through the documentation for Cinemachine, I realized that my settings were set to do nothing, which causes the camera to not rotate. Since the shake doesn't return to absolute zero, this breaks the camera. The solution for me was to define an aim target using the same as follow target configuration so the camera's Z position uses the player's, which should be 0 after shaking. Part of the feedback I received included points about death feeling very lackluster. I originally made a very basic color tone and a bubble release animation and asked for feedback. For inspiration, Hooch found a playlist with over 100 death animation clips where a character drowns in video games. Hooch also gave me an idea for how to orchestrate the events so the player animates properly and can sync for a few seconds before the death screen shows up. With that inspiration, I worked on a version of the death screen that would rotate the character and let it sink to the ground for a few seconds. However, my Cinemachine settings would then break since they inherit the character's rotation. So once again, I went to the Cinemachine documentation to read about the aim component. By swapping the configuration to hard look at, I no longer inherit the rotation and the camera doesn't bug out. I thought I could quickly automate fixing these in scenes by using my scene checklist and a button. However, the property didn't serialize properly, so I had to do it manually anyway. Another minor tweak in this animation was to increase the shake intensity when drowning. I tinkered with a few values and settled for a shake with an intensity factor of 5. Part of the feedback from playtesters was that low oxygen levels aren't obvious if you're not looking at the HUD. A suggestion I got was to add a slight zoom to add attention. Unfortunately, with a pixel-perfect camera, I wasn't able to get a good set of orthographic zoom values that didn't feel like too little or too much, so I decided to pursue a different avenue. The second way I decided to explore effects was to use the vignette effect and color the edges of the screen. I have seen this effect used a lot in other games for low health. To invoke the vignette, I also plan to use Feel since it is part of the supported feedbacks. After following their documentation and installing the post-processing package, I was able to get an effect working with the main camera and the basic feedback. Since I'm using Cinemachine, I thought I had to use its post-processing components instead of the ones by Unity for things to properly work on the right layer. So I went through the Feel asset docs on how to make my own feedback to invoke the event. My first success criteria was getting the feedback component loaded and printing a string to the console. With that set up, I then played with the post-processing values to figure out how I wanted the effect to look before trying to control its params with my feedback. My next step was to make my own shaker. This component receives the feedback event and does something. I simply made it toggle the post-processing effect on and off as a start. Looking at the provided shaker, I copied its parameters and logic and then had my feedback send those same arguments. With that working and now having a better understanding of the framework, I made my event receiver listen to the asset's default event instead of my own. To wrap things up, I contributed my version of a Cinemachine shaker to the asset's external samples repository for other users of Cinemachine. With the effects set up, it was time to retrofit the oxygen system to be able to invoke those effects. I created a new script responsible for handling the oxygen warnings and made it listen to the oxygen system. It then triggers the feedback from the field asset to play the vignette effect. My first version was too fast, so I googled how long a regular breath is and made my vignette take about that long to fade in and out. For the final breath, I wanted the vignette to stay on, so I originally set the value to not reset the vignette after it was done playing a 10th time. This caused the vignette to stay on when restarting the scene. I recall from the field tutorials that multiple feedbacks could be played and distinguished based on intensity, so I set up 3 distinct stages to play with their own intensity range. Since I have to associate an intensity based on oxygen values, I created a range class that allowed me to configure min and max values in the inspector. This was surprisingly much easier to do without needing a custom editor. With all of that configurable, I then tested how the final effect would look. The original timing of a learning at 5 seconds felt too short, so I made time ranges go from 0 to 10 seconds. This clip has an odd jump at 5 seconds, which is when the first effect is halfway through finishing and the next one is playing. As usual, I showcased all of the progress on Discord and had a suggestion to re-record the end of the trailer and instead drown. I spent a lot of time nailing down the timing until someone suggested just making an invisible area that calls the drown event. Since I could control this now, I also made that trigger extend the time before the game end screen shows up, so I had more footage for the trailer without UI. Now that I could drown on command, I also made the pulsating effect playable from the debug menu and a longer vignette effect when drowning. I think all of the iteration, along with suggestions by art director Hooch, really increased the quality of the game in the trailer. Another suggestion that came out of the first version of the trailer was to fake the UI instead of trying to orchestrate the exact timing, which would help with capturing specific shots. I spent a lot of time learning how to use the effects in VSTC to properly shrink the oxygen bar at specific intervals, as well as fade elements to emulate the health bar. A lot of time went into recording clips and specific sequences using the Unitive recorder. At the time of writing, here's how many clips I ended up making.
That's it for this devlog. My focus for the next part will be
design the bonus level, design the interactive credit sequence, address more playtest feedback items. If you want to support me, please visit the Don't Drown store page linked in the description and add the game to your wishlist. Until next time. Alright, you're probably wondering where the trailer is. Well, dear viewer, thank you for watching until the end and enjoy the Don't Drown gameplay trailer.